This is Curious Minnesota, a Star Tribune project that sends staff from the state's largest newsroom hunting for the answers to great questions we receive from you. We're here to answer everything you want to know about the state's people, places, and culture. I'm your host, Erica Pearson. Today's episode is about a sculpture that may not be as, monumental as Stonehenge in England, but it does have a very unique Minnesota story. The sculpture we're talking about today is called Basshenge. You can find it right off Highway 11 near Baudette. We're talking about it today because we got a question from Brian Pilcher in Duluth. He was driving and saw it off in the weeds and wanted to know more about what it is. Thanks so much to Brian for this question. So Brian saw it from the side of the road, but let me tell you a little bit about what it looks like. It's honestly kind of hard to describe. So, Stonehenge with its huge monumental stones stacked on each other, that iconic image. Basshenge plays with this, but they're silhouettes of bases made of metal. They're made of steel. The bases form almost like doorways that you could walk through and around. They're up on tall concrete pillars, so they're really lifted up above the grass and brush that's now kind of grown around it. I asked reporter Alicia Eler to look into Brian's question. Alicia covers arts and culture stories here at the Minnesota Star Tribune, and she joins me now. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for being here. Well, sometimes I feel like a sculpture is made more interesting by its surroundings. What's the landscape like there? Can you paint me a picture?
So it's off this highway that's, miles from the Canadian border in the furthest north of Minnesota. And it's like you have to park and walk a bit off of the highway from what people have told me. And you could miss it if you're not on the lookout. There's no sign. There's nothing. You just have to know the exact mile marker. And currently it's sort of amongst this overgrown field of just, shrubbery and grass, and it's out there.
I do wish I could go there. It's a bit out of the way for a spur-of-the-moment pilgrimage, but it sounds cool. So where did you go first to find out about Basshenge's history?
I went looking around for Basshenge and found out that it was created by this guy, Joseph Guastafeste, who I'm like, who is this guy? Oh, it turns out he was the principal bass for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra for almost 50 years. So I'm like, what is he doing there? I saw he died in 2023. Otherwise, I would have contacted him directly. In his obituary, his daughters were mentioned. So I reached out to both of them, and his daughter, Manon, got back to me. And she put me in touch with William Schrickle, who is a longtime friend and former student of Joseph's. And William is also currently the assistant principal bass of the Minnesota Orchestra. So we had a nice local connection, and then I kind of went from there.
That's so cool. And what did he say about his teacher? I guess I'm curious in terms of playing the bass. That seems like a really illustrious classical career. And then how he took this turn into building a monument.
Well, William told me that, Joseph was always into art, but it wasn't something he, publicly did anything about. He didn't promote any art, but he would kind of have ideas, but it was his own thing for himself. And he had quite a career. He went to Juilliard. He played in the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, New Orleans Symphony, just a really prolific person.
Wow, that's so cool. And whose idea was it to build the sculpture?
It was either Joseph's idea. Somewhere else I read that it was Joseph and his wife, Bronte Journeau's idea.
I'm curious about where the Stonehenge part comes in, or the henge part comes in.
Well, from what I understand, he visited Stonehenge, he and his wife did, and then they came up with an idea. It was, hey, what if we made this but with the bass, your beloved bass?
I love it. And why not go big, right? So that's cool. Well, you mentioned a little bit about Joseph Guastafeste's career, but what else did you learn about him?
I learned a lot about him. Actually, he was born in 1930 in Brooklyn. His parents are Italian immigrants from Sicily, and he started learning music at an early age, playing the mandolin, switched to violin, and then his older brother, Eddie, nudged him to play bass because he was like, oh, you could play in my jazz band if you know that. So, sibling nudging, like, oh, okay, I'll try it out. And then it took off, and he got an audition with Fred Zimmerman of the New York Philharmonic and the Juilliard School, and then things sort of continued in that way. Yeah, he joined the New Orleans Symphony in 1949. He was the principal bass at the Dallas Symphony from 1950 to 61, and then he joined the Chicago Symphony Orchestra in 61, and he was there through his retirement in 2010. Sometime, according to William Schrickle, sometime in the 1980s, Joseph and his wife bought a cabin near Baudette, Minnesota. It's kind of like a getaway, from busy life in Chicago. And what started as a cabin expanded into a home, and they've also bought some land. So Basshenge happened in 2001 after they'd been up there for some time, but before Joseph retired and before he moved to Minnesota full time.
Got it. And I was curious to hear a little bit of him playing, and we did find a piece called First Baseman that was written by Elias Tannenbaum for the Chicago Symphony, and here he is as a soloist in 1999. I love that sound. Well, I'm curious about how, after he has this idea, how he actually made Basshenge a reality. And Alicia actually found one of the folks who literally fabricated the pieces. So we'll get into that after the break. We're back, but before we continue our conversation, I wanted to tell you that Curious Minnesota is going live this spring. We will be recording live at the Strib Outdoor Adventure for All event on Saturday, May 9th at the Trailhead at Theodore Wirth Park. It's a celebration of Minnesota's abundant natural resources and recreation opportunities. Send us your best questions about Minnesota's outdoors, and we might feature your question at the event. Send them to curious@startribune.com. Thanks. Okay. So Joseph Guastafeste decides to build Basshenge in northern Minnesota on his plot of land. He's inspired by Stonehenge in England, and he talks a little more about it in this interview with Lakeland PBS.
I pick good artists. I know how to do that. If I'm not a great artist myself, I know how to pick good artists. So I got these guys on the thing, and this is how it all came about.
Okay, so tell me about how this was actually made. Who are some of the artists that Guastafeste tapped to make it happen?
So the artists who designed the actual base were Richard Hunt, Matthew Owens, and then Joseph also designed some. But the fabricator was none of them, because fabricating in steel is, you have to really be skilled to know how to do that. So they got in touch with this guy, Leland Nelson, who lives up by Baudette. He's a machinist by trade, and he told me, I actually got on the phone with him, and he told me he had never worked on something like this, but he was up for the challenge. So basically, initially, he told me that Joseph wanted 1-inch steel, which would be super heavy, and he was like, hey, that's too much. So they moved it to 3/8 inch steel. And basically, Leland cut out the designs into steel these huge bases and the lentils. So then Joseph wanted to paint them, and Leland said, hey, instead of painting them, why don't you let them rust, and then the rust becomes like a natural protection of the steel, so these will last for a really long time because they're not on the ground where they would collect moisture and rust until they're no longer useful, but they're up in the air, so the moisture doesn't stay on them. So they're safe in that way, up in the air.
That's so interesting. And did he talk about how long it took at all?
I know it debuted in 2001, but it's quite a while ago. It's like over 25 years ago, so it's a bit murky. But
did he have any stories or moments that he remembered from when they were doing the work?
He told me that, Joseph and the crew considered the number 7 lucky. So they wanted everything to have 7s, 7 degrees, 14 minutes, everything divisible by 7, all the angles and the measurements divisible by 7. And then Leland told me the funny part about that was when they started, they were trying to figure out where to put Basshenge. And they were like, oh, let's go, 14 feet in from the highway or from this like right-of-way sign. They started drilling, and then the first thing they hit was the main telephone line.
Oh, no.
So that cut off most of the telephones for eastern Koochiching County. And then he said maybe the number 7 wasn't so lucky. But he kept saying it was quite a process. It was, several months of getting things going. It was very, rainy when they were working, which made digging and stuff all the worse. But they got through it. He said it was raining cats and dogs for a week.
Wow. What did Leland tell you anything about what the other locals thought about what was happening and the project?
Leland told me that his friends he said, ribbed him a little bit, and I said, well, why is that? He said, well, this was so different for, what he was used to working on and what people are used to seeing.
That's different.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
That's literally what he said.
Well,
very artsy, he said.
Yeah. I think it's great that he ended up building a lasting monument like this. It's cool. So when did they finally finish it? And did they throw a big party or have a concert or mark it in some way?
It was finished in 2001. It debuted then. And Leland said there was a big grand opening. Quite a few local people showed up. And then he described it as kind of a religious ceremony. Music played, classical music. They did a blessing. And he said it was kind of like church.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Well, also because the lentils, are representing the 7 deadly sins and stuff. So it's a churchy vibe to it a little bit.
Got it. And what is a lentil exactly?
It's on the staffs of each base, they hung steel musical notations and images that reference the 7 deadly sins and cardinal and theological virtues. It's like the horizontal structural beam above.
Gotcha.
So they're connecting the tops of the bases.
That makes sense. So it's 25 years old. What has happened to the sculpture in the years since it was built?
Well, what William told me was that Joseph didn't care if it was maintained. He knew it would last, based on the materials, and there's no upkeep. So at this point, it hasn't been tended to in at least over 10 years. There's brush growing up around it, grass, but it's out there, It's kind of gone back to nature a little bit, but you can go and find it.
That's cool. And because the bases are up on the concrete, you can still see so much of the sculpture, even with some overgrown areas around it. And from what we've learned from you about the artist and the artists involved, the idea of it being perfectly tidy maybe doesn't quite fit. Do you know if musicians make pilgrimages or if it ends up on guidebooks and roadside attraction lists and things like that?
It's certainly on roadside attractions lists, like Atlas Obscura lists it. It's sort of this roadside attractions, YouTube channel. So it's sort of there's just been brief things written about it. But it's a very specific location, and you have to really make the trek.
That makes sense. It's cool to imagine hosting concerts there, things like that, but maybe that's for another time. It sounds like it's going to stick around, so there's always time.
Yeah, well, I guess he wanted to build a parking lot, and he had other ideas of turning the barn into like an art gallery, but those didn't happen. But, Basshenge is there for the visit.
That makes sense. What else did you learn as you looked into this, Alicia? Did anything surprise you?
I guess I was most surprised that there wasn't a plan to maintain it. And then it's just out there without any signs or, just sort of, but sort of as like a mystery. But then I was like, well, that's how Stonehenge, it's just there, and people kind of make these pilgrimages to it. So I thought that actually made sense once I thought about it more. But it initially surprised me that there's no information.
That makes sense. And well, thank you so much, Alicia. This has been great. And thanks to Brian Pilcher, who was curious about Basshenge in northern Minnesota. You can read all of our Curious Minnesota stories online at startribune.com. And if you have feedback or a question you'd like us to answer, send a note to curious@startribune.com. This podcast is produced by Melissa Townsend, and the music is by Matt Gilmer.